discover how to leverage AI superintelligences for decision-making in your business. In today's episode, we have Noah Healy, and he's a market designer and game theorist working on better economic systems. So Noah, please tell us, how can entrepreneurs leverage AI superintelligences in order to have faster and better decision-making?
AI Superwoman podcast with Lily Patrascu shares the world's most innovative AI tools and processes to go from technophobe to AI pro, attract leads, close sales, automate your business, enhance productivity, and deploy AI agents to do your work.
Well, effectively, that's the entire value proposition of these potential systems. So making decisions yourself, obviously, is something that's very attractive to entrepreneurs, but you can't spread yourself but so thin, and also you're only so smart. And so if you're in a position where making decisions more quickly or better will be of great advantageousness to you, then designing systems that can be capable of superintelligence becomes something that makes your business function better. And the key problem is that if you have a system that makes decisions better than you do, then you will find yourself frequently disagreeing with the decisions that it makes because they're smarter than you. And so the key thing to get past is designing the system such that you trust the system to make decisions for you. So it's something like delegation, which is always a problem for entrepreneurs as they grow, but not delegation to other people directly, but to a system which would incorporate both machine and human intelligences. And that is a sort of scaling issue for, or scaling option, I would say, in the modern day now.
Thank you. So tell us, how do we set the AI superintelligences for our businesses? And what exact tools do we use to make this happen? And what kind of prompts do we give it in order to set up the entire system?
Sure. Well, the first thing is that in many cases, chatbots aren't really going to be that helpful to you except as an incorporated piece. Some of the superintelligence systems that we have that are highly effective are game AIs. There's an open source project called Lila C0 that's been dominating chess. It's the second best chess engine on the planet. That same kind of system works across a wide variety of situations, from poker, stratego, and other things. And so if you can define part of your business unit in those kinds of deep strategic games, which many business units are in fact defined in that fashion. Things like customer relationship management essentially sets up a plan of action. Then you can use those sorts of AIs to effectively run through and simulate the behavior across that game, effectively war game scenarios for you at hyperspeed, and then provide advice from those war games that would give you better strategies. And so that would be an example of exploitation. Another example is effectively exploiting markets in a more flexible way. And that's where my expertise with market design, game theory comes in. You need to define what the goals of a system that will incorporate AIs with human intelligence to become super intelligent will be. And once you do so, you can effectively create a measurement of how much people or agents are moving towards or away from those goals, and provide a mechanism that hands out rewards and punishments. And if you do that stably, then that system will produce optimal outcomes as it evolves towards its sort of best outcome. And that creates a very different kind of set of relationships, if you will.
Thank you. Now, let's take a practical example. Okay. Let's say I have a property investment business where I'm investing in rental properties and then I'm renting them out. How can I use this for my business?
Well, so let's go with the first example. Let's say you were going to try to do gamification, right? So if you're doing property rental, I'm going to guess that your business involves a combination of maintenance, acquisition, and possibly sales. And so what you could do is chew up the property records for the areas that you're operating in. And this is something that, you'll have to pay a little money to get the records, but once you have the records, this is where things like the chatbot AIs can clean up that information for you in some cases and give you sort of a historical pattern of where things are going, what things are doing. And then you could create a fairly simple simulation of action over history, if you will. So you could have one of these self-training strategic AIs effectively simulate running your business historically over and over again using the actual historical information and gaining deep knowledge about the nature of properties in your area and have it effectively develop its own independent and superior strategy of how to approach that problem. Then you would have this object that knows more about the property market in your neighborhood and operational space, and that would be something you would be able to duplicate across other property markets when and if you chose to expand.
Thank you. So, which part they would be able to know more about than me? So, for example, let's say that I have a portfolio of 30 properties in a certain location, and the information that I could feed the AI superintelligence is that they're all rental properties, they're all in a certain area, they're all rented at a certain price. But that's kind of like it. I can't think of what else I could feed it that could give it like great information. Now, if it was something where I'm also buying the properties, then maybe I would have some locations as well and some prices for that as well. But I mean, what could it do better than me, for example, in this scenario?
Well, if you're just operating, again, if you can gamify the operation, then you've got something working for you. There's a famous case I can't remember which hotel chain it was. One of the hotel chains had a thing back in the 20th century where if anyone in the hotel chain came up with a better procedure, and they were heavily procedured across sort of everything, then the efficiency gain, you would essentially get a bonus of 50% of the efficiency gain of the first year of the general implementation. And so they had a maid that came up with basically a better way to make up the room that saved a few minutes. She demonstrated how to do this. They created a training course out of it. They duplicated it across, many, many units, and that she wound up having, like a couple of years salary basically in return for doing this. So if you can lay out the procedures of management of your properties appropriately, again, that becomes the kind of thing that you can have an AI strategically run through over and over again to try to come up with more efficient techniques or so on. Or again, from the marketing perspective, you could then build that kind of thing into your employee base, where you can take feedback in a structured way that you would be able to manage across a larger organization. And again, super intelligence, sort of like 5 people have more brains than one person does. And so having systems that can extract information abstracted through multiple human brains is maybe just as good or better than having a some computer that's sitting in warehouses in Texas that can do it for you as well. It's just a matter of cost versus benefit. So if you do the work of setting up the regularization of systems to be able to make them replicable across your organization, then you can plug known computer technologies in to have them search for improved optimizations, or you can upgrade those as your own employees innovate, or you can do both of those things at the same time.
Thank you. I think I understand now. So what's happening is that, first of all, I would need to have standard operating procedures for all the things that I'm doing, which currently I don't really have for everything. I have for some of the things, like how to sign a contract, how to find clients, how to market, how to, all the different bits. But I don't have for absolutely everything, but I do have for some. So let's say if I was to feed all this information about standard operating procedures into the AI Superintelligence, then it could tell me, okay, you could actually save time, or I don't know, could it tell me whether I could save money as well by getting, I don't know, the cleaner to come once every 2 weeks instead of once a week, or I don't know, these kind of like small optimization things that could lead to me saving hundreds of thousands of pounds, because it will suggest tiny things that overall compounded could make a really massive difference. I think that's the idea. But this will only work, from what my understanding is, if you already have some sort of standard operating procedures. Am I right in saying that?
It would be extremely helpful. Many of these techniques essentially boil down to doing statistics. Statistics is essentially just the process of counting. Counting makes sense when things are similar enough that it makes sense to count them. If you sort of meet everyone as they are, then you don't count them up. It's, there's Joe and there's Daisy and there's Frank and so on. If you're just counting 1, 2, 3 down a line, that's different. Statistics gain power the higher the number you can count to. But if you are cheating the system, if you will, if you're sort of conflating things that don't really belong together in order to get bigger numbers, then you're doing more damage than you're helping yourself out. So the more regularized you can make things, the more powerful statistics become, and that then the more powerful the mathematical tools become. And since computers are actually mathematical tools, the larger you can make the numbers, the more powerful the computer advantages can offer.
Thank you. So aside from, let's say, operational things that, let's say the AI superintelligence could come up with some small things that could contribute to a really huge savings over time. Aside from operational things, what else could the AI superintelligences help me do for my business? Let's say for this particular example of property business, where we're doing property management, what else could they do for my business? Like, give me some examples of like types of actions that it could take as a decision.
Well, in property management specifically, you spend an awful lot of time taking client requests. People need usually fairly standard pieces of information, from my understanding. I'm aware of several property management AI businesses just in my neck of the woods, for example. So if you have a frontline system that can handle 90% of that kind of thing, where they're asking a question that can be responded to by basically pointing to the part of the introductory brochure, the light bulbs are in this part of the closet or whatever, then there you go. 90% of half of your business just got off your plate. And with that extra 45% of your time, you can start working on some of these next steps.
Thank you. So what about the other part where, let's say, you need to get a contractor to look at certain things? Could it optimize that part as well?
Potentially, yes. And this is another thing that's potentially interesting as you start expanding this. You don't necessarily have to build one of these systems just for yourself. You could conceivably benefit by including external partners or even external competitors. In a marketplace, you have this weird kind of situation where even your competitors are helping you out. And so you see this in cities, for example. There'll be districts in some cases where like a bunch of the same kind of business will all be in the same location. Why would you want to be near your competitors? Well, by creating a part of the city that's dedicated to one specific kind of thing, everybody who wants that thing comes to that part of the city. And so now you become easier to find because of that. And so with contractors, using these same kinds of ideas about standardization of action and so on, if you can embed contractors into that space, you could create a competitive zone where you would be able to manage multiple simultaneous contractors that would have more regular things that they would also be working at and be able to pull into. And in order to sort of gain the draw to get multiple contractors interested in doing something like that, you could draw in potential competitors to also feed into that system, and you could lower your total transaction costs, which is ultimately the basic point of marketplaces. So if instead of having to go out and find a contractor to do some specific job, and your competitor will also have to go out and find a contractor to do some different specific job, if you've reasonably standardized the job types, then it becomes possible for contractors and sort of, service desirers to have a unified portal where it's relatively simple to, again, statistics. There isn't one job that's this exact thing and another job that's that exact thing. There's 5 or 6 jobs that are the standard thing, and there's 5 or 6 people that are looking for doing the standard job that week, and suddenly it becomes very, very easy to simply negotiate a standard industry price.
Thank you. So I used to run a property management business for 14 years. And what I found was that the most time-consuming thing tended to be the viewings. Not so much actually the reporting of issues, because we had a system where they were being reported by WhatsApp. It takes like 1 second to read that. But the second thing that took a lot of time was actually managing the contractors. Although we could just message them again by WhatsApp, and they would oftentimes just come to the place by themselves with their own key. But until we set up that system, sometimes we had to like go there and open the door and whatever. So is there any other thing that you can think of that could be useful for minimizing time spent on a property management business where we can leverage AI superintelligences?
Not off the top of my head, but again, the degree of insight that's possible out of these deep learning systems is difficult to underestimate. The systems that have never been sort of trained by human hands are so much better than the best chess players in the world that the best chess players in the world have functionally no chance at all of winning games against them. That same system has developed a poker engine that, when in a tournament against very highly skilled, highly respected poker players, and they described it as almost like having their minds read, that they would be in a hand and they'd have a plan of something like, if the bet is more than this, I'm going to do A, and if the bet's less than that, I'm going to do B, and somehow the thing would just always bet the number that was between those two that they didn't have a plan for. The games like Diplomacy, games like Stratego have discovered insights that we as human beings never developed. And so the potential for the existence of better insights isn't something that I, with my human brain, are likely to be able to provide to you. But if you sort of do the work and have scale, then a superhuman brain, who knows what it might be able to find.
Thank you. Now, I think the biggest, you can say the biggest issue with these AI superintelligences is that first, how do you even figure out what they can do? Because the minute you figure out what they can do, that's when you actually can apply it. But it just seems to be like it's really applying big picture thinking to such an extent that maybe people haven't even thought of doing this without an AI. So it's now because of the capacity of the AI, now we have like this ability that we never had, in the past, or maybe I wasn't aware of it. So the question is like, how do you even figure out the possible applications of AI superintelligences for your specific business? Like, where do you figure out like what kind of potential things it can do?
Well, that's a real challenge, and this is a challenge that our society is really crashing on the rocks of right now. Just last year, the biology or medicine Nobel was given to some guys, including a team from Google, that developed a mechanism to reverse engineer protein design. So they can now create artificial proteins that do things that no naturally evolved protein can do, and then instruct living creatures to start producing those proteins. That's incredible. A different team, very similar, but side, next to them at Google, last year also dropped a list of, I think it was something like 500,000 or so, a third to a half of a million of brand new crystalline structures. To put this in context, it was about 3 times as many crystalline structures as human beings had discovered in our thousands of years of chemistry. So the scope at the top end is enormous, and depending on what kind of business you're in, that scope will have greater or lesser extents. One strong possibility that strikes me from things like property management or other relatively kind of small scale regional business is that having a better communication / management system would allow the nationalization of those kinds of industries, which is something we've seen with like the rise of both Walmart and wrestling. 50 years ago, the space that Walmart occupied, sort of the local general store, had regional chains, but there were more than one regional chain in the country. Sears was very popular and well known, but they were not by any means as dominant as Walmart has become. And in many cases, localities would have a small local store that met that niche, that need. Wrestling at the same time was regional. And then a combination of, in the case of Walmart, using big data and early statistical methods to be able to manage across the system created this dominant national chain. In the case of wrestling, it was cable television, again creating a nationalized television viewing audience. That is a potential that exists in any given industry. The counterweight to that is that locality is important. Markets have value in managing that as well, and historically do a better job in that management. But going back to your question of what is potentially possible, the foundational work that was done to establish that computers could exist and what they were, which was done by Alan Turing, essentially mathematically proved that the limits of computers were the limits of human imagination. In fact, the limits of any imagination. And in fact, computers mathematically define what the limits of imagination are. Turns out imagination has limits. Unfortunately, one of the things that's on the other side of those limits are where the limits are. So we don't know where the limits are, and we're never going to find out. But what it does mean is that we are sort of living in a magic time. It's not a great answer, but either deep study or cozying up to somebody who's done the deep study is really necessary in order to get a sense of where the boundaries might be.
Thank you. Now let's take another practical example of my publishing business. How would you use AI superintelligences for decision making? So I would say the thing that takes me the most amount of time right now is the actual writing of the books, and then the publishing takes a lot of time, and then creating someone's brand that takes even more time. But I would say the bulk of it is, of course, the writing. And yes, I understand with ChatGPT and other tools similar to that, it can be written in not as much time. So, what is your suggestion?
Well, there again, it's important to understand sort of what ChatGPT is and what ChatGPT is not. ChatGPT is much more of a style creator rather than a content creator. So if you have the content, if you have the information, ChatGPT can certainly more rapidly produce a variety of styled versions of that information. And that, as you say, is one of the time-consuming stages. And so that's one of the issues. Again, in a broader sense, using things like AI chatbots to be able to chew up textual data, this would be an expensive prospect, probably not sort of fit for you. But I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his name right now. But the one of the open AI backers who was Elon's old partner at the money place and then back to Zuckerberg, you might recognize him. He's also JD Vance is one of his proteges, and he's got some sort of connections to the new Trump administration, and his name might come to me. But at any rate, he's recently started a science fiction publishing company. Again, using the ability of modern text bot engines to sort of chew up very large data corpuses and come up with these guesstimate numbers that sort of approximate something that's deeper about them. It may well be reasonable to start doing deep studies on like popular culture and books to find connections and build sort of a guide to what may or may not be popular. The other side of that, which is, I think, much more likely to be valuable, is the sales first approach that dominated the sort of low budget film industry for much of the 20th century, where they'd make the poster first, and then if it got sort of a hit, then they'd write it and make the movie. The purpose of books is sales, essentially, and so having AI systems sort of flooding the zone with potential content to see what becomes popular and then using that popular sentiment to guide what actually gets produced is potentially very cheap now, because zone flooding is very cheap. And that is something, that inundation, we're already seeing that really degrade the value of old school social networks, from Facebook to YouTube and so on. They're all getting kind of clogged up with AI slop. That's likely to continue. And so to some extent, you can join the slop, but do so in a strategic way to attempt to extract where value for true content may actually come.
Thank you. So how do you figure out what's actually popular?
Well, again, hopefully by what is actually getting interacted with. So to go back to the analogy, in the old days, they would make up these posters, they'd stick them up in movie theaters, marquees across the country, and have people listening in the lobbies to see what the kids or the adults were laughing or oohing at, and trying to, and then saying, okay, well, I was a teenage werewolf. Let's get it written and casted and make this thing. And so that kind of thing, where if you are sort of putting out these trial attempts, you can see what goes viral. And this isn't some totally like sort of unheard of thing. 50 Shades of Grey started its life in a comment section of fan fiction. So, that structure works and has worked and likely will continue to work because people, like what people like. And the way to find out what people like is to expose people to things and find out if they like it.
Thank you so much. Tell us how entrepreneurs can find you.
Well, I'm pretty easy to find. My name is Noah Healy, and I'm on LinkedIn under Noah Healy. You can also reach out to me directly, noahphealy@yahoo.com. You can find out more about my marketplace ideas at cordis.com. And, simple Google search or whatever your favorite search engine is, will find a bunch of hits.
Follow me for more AI productivity tools.